Dai sai ge da poku mo so fuku den e hi bu nyorai kyo kodo sho shu jo. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, saving all sentient beings. Dai sai ge da buku mo so fuku den e hi bu nyorai kyo kodo sho shu jo. That's the Robe Chant. And it relates to, pick over the top, this, my green rag, the Rakusu. When Dogen went to China in, I think it was actually 1223, so that's 800 years ago this year, one of the things which most impressed him was sitting with the other monks in the monastery, in already practicing what would become in Japan the Soto tradition. And each morning, after morning zazen, they would place their folded robes on their heads and recite this chant. He said it was, tears flowed silently down my face. It's one of the most affecting things he'd ever encountered. And he vowed that when he went back to Japan, he'd institute this as a practice. So this is an old chant. In some ways, I suppose, quite a strange one. It asks important questions about us. Because how literally do we take the idea of a robe? Dogen was a medieval Japanese. He thought the robe itself was endowed with marvellous qualities, that literally wrapping yourself in it, performing zazen, transformed you, protected you. And protection is a word which crops up a lot in Buddhism. We take the refuges to protect us. The precepts offer us some protection, and the robe offers us some protection as well. But of what kind? What do we mean by robe anyway? Is it just kind of a great flappy thing, or what? Well, the robe in question here is the kesa, the ceremonial robe, so not the kind of black robes that you might see a Zen monk wandering around in most of the time. It's the proper large format. Can be, well, more or less any colour actually. Traditionally in Japan they're dull, spoilt colours, messy colours, no colour in particular. But obviously in other traditions we see saffron, we see bright orange, we see magenta, all kinds of other colours. And some of the more ceremonial robes are made out of wonderful silken stuff, the exact opposite of this idea of this broken coloured patchwork robe. And patchwork is an important quality here because The Buddhist robe is made in the pattern traditionally handed down from the time of the Buddha himself. And the idea of this broken no colour in particular is absolutely central to it, because traditionally the patchwork robe was patched from fabrics of absolutely no value, scavenged from the dung heap, from the charnel ground, any kind of despoiled, despicable rag that no one else wanted. You cleaned it, you dyed it down to a fairly nondescript colour. Don't quote me on this, but my understanding is that the original robes, rather than being dyed in saffron or something marvellously expensive like that, were this kind of fusty yellow colour because they were dyed in cow's urine. That would certainly be much more in keeping with the idea behind this robe, assembled out of nothing, bits and pieces, rubbish, brought together to make a covering, to make a symbol, to make an embodiment. So what about the pattern of the patchwork? Well, again, there's a traditional story for it. One day, the Buddha and his attendant, Ananda, his cousin, younger cousin, were out walking, and they were walking through the rice fields, the paddy fields, little strips of irrigation with grass paths, possibly dirt paths, depending exactly the time of year. And this Buddha said, this pattern is wonderful, so beautiful. Ananda, make me a robe. Let us all make robes in this paddy field, this patchwork pattern. That's the traditional origin story of the robe. So we have two stories or ideas coming together here. One, that it's a representation of this very human landscape. Cultivation, nature, so humans and nature, humans as nature, humans as part of nature, working together in this hugely efficient form of cultivation, feeding, nourishing, taking care of. And then that we make the symbol of this out of nothing, out of the worthless, out of the rejected, out of the dregs, the dross. So out of that we make the image of something wonderful. Why would we choose the dress and the the dross and the dregs? One word, attachment. We're much less likely to get attached to these fabrics than we are to something beautiful. And in terms of real life practice, well, that's quite interesting as well, isn't it? Because I think there's another sutra in which the Buddha says, well, don't get attached to the fabric of your robe. If somebody offers you a wonderful fabric to make a robe from, fine. If somebody else gets a wonderful fabric to make a robe from, don't get attached to that either. Don't feel jealous. And equally, don't feel that you're so good for having such a rubbish robe that you can't get attached to, that somehow makes you superior to somebody who has a nicer robe, a nicer fabric. So even in the time of the Buddha, in the monastic community, there's all this stuff going on, and the Buddha's perfectly aware of all the stuff that's going on. And this goes through, and of course, do you wear a wonderful brocade jacquard silk robe to show how magnificent you are? Do you wear a totally humble robe? The Dalai Lama tells wonderful stories about, you see two lamas coming down the hill One has fantastic trappings on their horse, a retinue of followers trailing behind them, carrying treasures and Buddhist scriptures and whatever. And the other is an old bloke who comes stumbling down the hill on his own. Which is the Lama you should listen to? Well, it's probably the second guy, because the first guy is obviously off into politics and off on some trip or other, which is not much to do with spiritual practice. So again, even in this kind of, most mundane of objects, there's the full play, the full cut and thrust of life as it is, our actual emotional reactions to things, even up to and including the politics of the whole thing. So this is the Buddha's robe, the monk's robe. Throw it about yourself, tie it in the appropriate fashion. Sit in zazen. As far as I know, it's only in Japan that the tradition of small robes took hold. And I think this is partly when you were wearing your kind of field work clothes, because rather than sitting around or just being spiritual all day, Chinese and then Japanese monks were very much workers, in theory at least, working in the kitchen or out in the fields or wherever. And you would wear your work clothes for that. And you might wear a small robe, a symbolic robe around your neck. And this is something which lay members of the community were started adopting as a sign of their profound commitment to the practice. They were not monastics, they were not monks, they were not nuns, but their practice, in their own terms, was intended to be equally sincere, equally profound, equally committed. And when Zen came to the United States, it's this practice of the small robe, the mini robe, the Rakusu, which most Zen groups, most Zen Sanghas in the United States adopted as a statement of intent, a statement of commitment, a statement of being part of the Sangha. Now, of course, it's interesting that one of the things which Joko gave up also when she abandoned her robes, stopped shaving her head, abandoned most of the chants, most of the trappings of traditional Buddhism and traditional Zen, abandoned the wearing of the Rakusu as well for members of the Sangha. But it's something which not all, but most of the ordinary mind groups that have followed on from Joko have re-established. Why? I think in a way to make the practice slightly less Californian, to take it back slightly in the direction of its origins. We weave this difficult balance within Zen practice. On the one hand, we're part of a Zen tradition which is 800 years old, a Buddhist tradition which is 2,500 years old. To abandon that, to imagine for 1 second that connection is not profound, significant, vital to what we do, is ridiculous. And yet, of course, neither do we want to become, in Barry's words, a Zen reenactment society. Oh yes, we do it the authentic Japanese way. We do it the way it's been done for hundreds of years, exactly. Well, no, we're finding our way of doing things. Now we're finding our way of doing things on Zoom. So on the one hand, we have this deep timeline, and on the other we have the encounter with this moment, this group, this society, and we're always trying to adjust, finesse how these intersect. So let's actually have a look. I'll hold it up for a minute. If I flip back the little tabs, this is don't know how you can actually see it. This is the Japanese version of the Buddhist robe in miniature. We've got 9 bands there. Now, you'll notice that the sections look as if they might be separate pieces, but actually they're pleated. So we have 9 pieces of fabric, 5 of which are actually pleated, and they align in different ways. And then we have the straightforward unpleated strips representing the paths in between the patches of rice. Traditionally, like Buddhist robes, these are all hand sewn. To sew a rakusu, well, it depends how intensively you do it, but it's probably going to take a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, depending on how much time you devote to it. All handwork, 1 stitch at a time. And that's an important practice in itself. That's an important meditation in itself, to create this connection through a simple, regular activity that's like zazen itself. Equally a poor activity. Not much technology involved here, just needle and thread and fabric. So, the Rakusu has this kind of dual function in this sense within a Zen Sangha where you're adopting them. On the one hand, it's a mark of commitment and, I'll use the word belonging. And as with all kind of identities, it's really important, the difference between whether we see this as an exclusive belonging, this is our club, we're in this club, you're not in this club, or whether we see it merely as an infinitely permeable statement of our coming together in commitment. I really like Barry's tongue-in-cheek, but in another sense absolutely serious comment on wearing the Rakusu. Says, it's like one of those buttons you get at a conference that says, "Hi, I'm Malcolm. How can I help you today?" It's an invitation. It should always be an invitation to each other to share our practice, and an invitation to everyone else to take up whatever relationship to that practice is meaningful to them. I actually started using, well, obviously I did the precept training with Barry. I did the formal taking of the precepts, which is traditionally, it's how you express this commitment to the Sangha, to the practice. With the New York Sangha, that's when I got my first Rakusu. But it was shortly after that I started the practice of the Rakusu with my prison group. I think we've had 5, maybe 6 or 7 people sew a Rakusu, take the precepts. I see normally it's a joining thing. In the prison context, it's a, oh, goodbye, farewell, hope you do out there, but you're still part of us thing. When I started working in prison, it was absolutely kind of forbidden to have any following up contact contact with people once they'd left. That's changing now, and I have varying degrees of contact with various people that I worked with in prison. But it seemed like a nice idea that people could actually take this out with them and go, no, I'm serious about my practice. We did this. It wasn't just a half-hour thing. It involves some commitment on my part. And it's really good that there's a physical component to this, an actual, literally material component to this. It's not just, well, as we say, the whole business of our practice, it should never be just in the head. It's about this body, how this body is reacting in this space at this time, always. But it's nice that it has a different sort of materiality that goes along with it. And as everything, it's a support. The zafu, the cushion on which I sit, is literally a support. But that we sit on cushions, to sit in a certain kind of posture, a certain range of postures, that's significant. If we sit with a mat, a zabuton, actually just defining the space, this space of practice, that's significant. If we have a bell, that's significant. Maybe if we use incense, all of these can be supports for practice. They're not essential rituals. They don't make magic happen. And that's back to the question, do we think the kesa, do we think the robe has magic qualities? Well, no. I'm a 21st century Western guy. I don't imagine any of that. And yet, equally, I don't imagine that it's irrelevant either. These are all supports. They're the framing, the way that we make our practice concrete, material, substantial, actual. And if we get attached to the forms and we get attached in that way, and we neglect what the practice is really about, which is understanding our non-separation, understanding that this practice is about how we walk together, then that's bad. But if these framings, these formal supports, remind us of the practice, mindfulness, literally bring to mind the practice, then that can be powerful and it can be very strong. I'll post the chant on the website and probably mail it out as well. Like all chants that were originally Chinese, it's got regular lines. Each of this is kind of 5 little pictograms, the little Chinese ideograms, which is why we chant it in the way that we do. It's 5 beats. Doesn't strictly follow the sense of the words. That's fine, that's just the way we chant them. And the translation. The first syllable is dai, which is great. The translation which I like of this is Kaz Tanahashi's translation. He translates that as a vast, the expanse of the robe. Vast is the robe of liberation. You get the sense of us all sheltering under this same vast robe of liberation. Robes, Rakusus, compassion, wisdom, non-separation, held together in this vast patchwork. A formless field, that's another title of the Rakusu, of the kesa, of the robe, taking us back to this original idea of the paddy field, but it's formless. It's an idea, it's an emotion, it's a feeling, it's all of these things of benefaction, a blessing. connecting us to all the other wearers, literally or metaphorically, in that we all wear the Buddha's robe as we practice. And then as the third line says, I wear the Tathagatas, the enlightened one, the awakened one, the thus gone one, if we're going to give it its literal translation. I wear the Tathagata's teaching. Great idea. Again, we want to think about this teaching as being in our head. What do I do? Give me the rules. No, I wear the teaching. It surrounds me. It enfolds me. I think it is literally unfold. I unfold the Tathagata's teaching around me. Why? Because it's not an abstract teaching. It's not an abstract knowledge. It's something that I live out, that I enact, that I embody. I come to inhabit the Tathagata's teaching. Saving all sentient beings is the traditional translation. The last couple of syllables, shujo, absolutely translated as sentient beings. Kaz, in another version of this translation, has awakening countless beings. I quite like sentient beings because to be sentient is to be able to suffer, and that ultimately our vulnerability to suffering is what links us all one to another. But countless beings, yes, there are countless of us. An awakening, yeah, awakening is maybe better than saving. The text doesn't literally say that, but awakening countless beings, that's good too. So we have vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, awakening, saving countless sentient beings. So at the moment we have our precept study group, and we're working towards maybe next spring the idea of doing a jukai ceremony, which might involve sewing rakusus if anybody wanted to. It would certainly involve this formal commitment to the idea of investigation that the precepts embody. Formal commitment to practice and practicing together. Again, not exclusively, heaven forfend. And in the sure and certain knowledge that everything is impermanent. But we take practice as a central aspect, a central commitment of our lives, which is an open invitation. Join us, let's do this. One last thought. This patchwork, this bringing together of different scraps, pieces of cloth to make a whole field. It's an image of non-separation. It's not just one piece of fabric. It's an image of bringing together, joining together, aligning, walking together, but allowing difference. We don't become the same. We haven't all had the same journey here. We won't be the same people as we are here and as we move forward. And yet we align ourselves, we share, we become one, well, we become not separate without erasing our difference. An image, an embodiment a symbol, the robe.